Visions of Mana is the most JRPG. What I mean by that is it magnifies all the things we love about JRPGs, but also magnifies the things that aren't so great about JRPGs. Instead of telling you about how I feel about the game as a whole and just giving you an arbitrary number based on how much I like the game, I'm going to go through some of the specific aspects and mechanics of the game so we can talk about each one individually. First, we're going to talk about the mechanics associated with combat, then we're going to go through the mechanics associated with exploration. Before we get into the specific mechanics, and I don't normally talk about the story in these videos, but I felt something was interesting and worth mentioning. The story of Visions of Mana is really similar on its face to Final Fantasy X, one of my favorite games of all time. They're both largely about the theme of sacrifice and going on a pilgrimage across the world and kind of exploring the ideas of sacrifice, but Visions of Mana and Final Fantasy X come to very different conclusions about the meaning and the purpose of sacrifice, and so that's an entirely separate video. It was something I thought was interesting. If you're interested in hearing about that or watching a video about that, let me know in the comments below and I might make that video. Now let's get into the combat mechanics. The first mechanic we'll talk about is the class system. So essentially there are 8 different element-based vessels. Each one can be assigned to any playable character, which changes their fighting style, their stats, their aesthetic. Each class also has an elemental plot, which functions kind of like a skill tree, but it's not a tree, it's just a line, a skill line for each class. And you can use that to unlock new moves and also new stats while you are in that class. So essentially classes can be upgraded as you play. With 5 different playable characters and 8 unique vessels, that's 45 different classes, including the base classes, that you can choose from within your party. Each class has its own strengths and weaknesses, and they're unique to each other, but each class also correlates to a weapon type, so you have multiple different weapon types. If this class says that you use a greatsword, then that class can only use a greatsword. So despite having 9 classes per character, there are only 3 distinct fighting styles that you can use per character. My opinion on this class system has had ups and downs. When it was first introduced in the game, I was really excited. It seemed like there was a lot of things to look forward to, a bunch of different classes that I could try and experiment with. But then as I found out that there was only 3 different fighting styles per character, I was kind of bummed. I feel like it was like a bait and switch. I thought I would have 9 different, entirely unique play styles. But as I kept playing, I realized that having just 3 fighting styles was actually a huge benefit, because it kind of is the best of both worlds. The way I see it, there's 2 kinds of players. There's the people that want to be experimenting the entire game and trying new things and seeing the amount of different combinations they can make with their characters and the amount of different synergies they can have. But then there's also the character that wants to find their own playstyle and hammer it down and master it. And with this class system, both of those playstyles win. The class system in this game gives meaningful variety without ever getting overwhelming. If you're the type of player that loves to experiment throughout the whole game, you have plenty to look forward to and plenty of experimentation that you can do. But even if you're the person that just wants to nail down a fighting style and master a specific style of play, you still have the opportunity to maintain that style of play while still having an element of variety. Because even if you find a fighting style that you enjoy and that you want to master by the end of the game, this class system still allows for you to experiment within that fighting style with 3 unique classes that offer different bonuses and different stat boosts that you can experiment with while still mastering one style of fighting. So regardless the type of player you are, there's always something to look forward to moving through the game. And I know it's early in the video, but I think that this is probably my second favorite thing that I'm going to be talking about in the entire video. So class system, good. Love it. Let me know what you think about the class system. I really like it. I think it feels unique and not overwhelming, but still enough variety to keep me satisfied for probably multiple playthroughs. Even now, just playing, I felt like there are different alternatives I want to try, but I'm more the kind of guy that likes to master a specific fighting style, so I haven't tried many. But it is incentive for me to play again. The next mechanic we're going to talk about are called ability seeds. They're essentially items that you can use to enhance characters in a more flexible way than changing their class entirely. They can boost individual stats, give you resistances, or even give you abilities that your character doesn't have. Each character starts out with 2 slots for ability seeds, but that can be boosted up to 10 by the end of the game. You'll find ability seeds like laying out in the wild in chests, or later in the game you can buy them or exchange them for different enemy drops. And it's kind of mysterious what this enemy drop is for. They kind of acknowledge it, but they don't say what it's for. But in the description of the item, it says it's for ability seeds, so it's not a spoiler. So that's what ability seeds are, but how do they actually function as you play? Ability seeds feel like they're trying to fill the function of materia in Final Fantasy VII, but they really fall flat. The flexibility and variation that they're trying to supply is really just overshadowed by the class system, and so they just come off feeling like an afterthought. I'm sure there's a lot of cool circumstances that you could create with 10 ability slots, but that's like really late in the game, and it feels like if you were going to add an ability seed that doesn't directly synergize with your class, you're really fighting an uphill battle. There are definitely times when you can use them for specific bosses, like hypothetically if you're fighting like a fire creature, then you might want to use a fire resistant ability seed, but besides that, there's not really any point to change them outside of just boosting your base stats that are already the best for that character. So overall, the majority of players are just going to use these ability seeds to boost the obvious stats, or in occasional situations they will use them to get specific resistances or specific boosts for specific elements. There are also tons of ability seeds that don't feel like I would ever have a need for them because there's just stronger ones or slightly better ones that I could assign to a character. So overall, the way I feel about ability seeds is that if all of your choices are obvious, then it just becomes like busy work at the end of the day. And so for ability seeds, I give this mechanic like a meh, but it doesn't detract too much from the game, so it's not like hurting your experience in any way. But if I've missed some kind of big part of ability seeds, if you are playing your game entirely based on your ability to change your character with ability seeds, let me know in the comments, because I mean, that would really open up a new aspect of the game for me and probably could change how I feel about the game overall. But you know, for me, ability seeds didn't have a huge impact. Let me know in the comments what you think. Now into the meat and potatoes. Let's talk about the actual fighting, the actual combat. Just like any other JRPG, the fighting is a bit complicated to just explain. It's not just button mash, although you could do that. So I'll go through the standard JRPG things that it has pretty quickly, and then I'll talk about the more unique aspects of Visions of Mana combat system. So each character gets a basic attack and a special attack. They get a double jump and a dash, including the air dash. You have a quick select menu. You can set up to 4 different spells, and in addition, 4 different items onto that menu that you can access at any time. But then you have access to 9 different spells and 9 different items that you can set into a kind of pause menu wheel. During fights, you can have 3 of your party members active in battle, and you can switch between them whenever you want to. But for every character, you can assign a strategy. That's basically how much they use mana, how much they use items when they're not being actively controlled. Basic enemies kind of vary between just 2 things. They're either flying or they're grounded, and they all have their own unique elemental weaknesses and strengths, but I don't actually know the logic between them. It seems like they're kind of random. You can check all of their resistances and weaknesses in the bestiary and the pause menu. There are a variety of status effects, just like normal. You can be poisoned, you can be frozen, etc. And any given boss battle will have a number of its own unique mechanics to kind of mix things up. Now onto the more unique mechanics for the combat. All of these come from the class system. Each vessel that can be assigned to a character has a special move that is on a cooldown after you use it of varying different times. And after a few upgrades, you have the ability to kind of like domain expansion JJK style the entire battlefield with your vessel. And within your own domain expansion, you have specific advantages. You also have like your big mama ability, your giant attack that does the most damage. It's called a class strike, and you build up that gauge through hurting people and getting hurt yourself. It builds for the whole party, and only one party member can use it, and that'll deplete it back to 0. And so those are all the things that go into the combat in Visions of Mana. And just like 99% of other JRPGs, it's really basic in the beginning, but as you get further along, it gets more technical and more fun. While I do think the combat is basically fun, I feel like they're trying to mimic Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat, but they're failing in a lot of ways. It's real time, you can pause at any time to choose an ability and take your time to think about it. You're focused on filling different gauges in order to do different moves. But what Final Fantasy VII Remake has that this game doesn't have is incentives to vary your style. The lack of incentives in combination with general inconvenience to do certain things in battle, for example, changing characters kind of has a lag. Using spells oftentimes feels like it's not stronger than just using basic attacks and special attacks. And so what this led to for me was pretty much just focusing on using one character, never switching, mostly doing basic and special attacks. I might occasionally spam a special move if I find out it's super effective, but mostly just basic attacks and special attacks. And also, little rant, the lock-on system in this game, it might be the worst lock-on system I've ever used. In fact, every time I did it out of habit, locked onto a person, I would get actively frustrated. So avoid the lock-on system pretty much. It doesn't like control the camera or anything. It just makes you generally punch in their direction. Lock on, it's a step back. So far, it seems like I've generally had a negative time with the combat, but there are saving graces for this combat system. The movement around the battlefield can be pretty fun, satisfying with the double jump and the infinite dash. That's pretty fun. Also, the class strikes and the class ability, super fun. I pretty much do every battle trying to use my class skill or my class ability. That's pretty much the pinnacle of combat for me. And the combinations of the 3 characters that you're using, their 3 class skills, can make some fun synergies. So that definitely improves the combat, in my opinion. So that's what I mean by basically fun. I mean, there's stuff to do in combat, but there's no incentives to do it. So you basically play simply for the entire game, and you can do that even into the late stages of the game. So combat is simple, but it can be enjoyable, and that's why I'll say it's mid. That's all I have to say about the combat. Next, we're gonna get into the exploration. But before we do that, if you've been enjoying this deep dive into the mechanics of Visions of Mana, please like the video, show some support, really appreciate it. On to exploration. The first aspect of exploration we're gonna explore is the setting. The world is split into multiple continents, and within each continent there are regions which are loosely based around the 8 elements of the world. And then inside of these regions, there are zones for you to explore. Pretty much just an open zone concept for a game. Each region has some zones that have monsters in them that you kind of just run around and explore, that separate different settlements. And the settlements range from small tiny village to large city. Each of the settlements contain a different species of people, so like squirrel people or dragon people. And also this game has all the typical JRPG zones. It has the desert, the ice level, the volcano, all that stuff. And so for the most part, it's a very typical JRPG setting. But the way I would describe it is it has the beauty of the ocean, but the depth of a puddle. All of the beautiful buildings in the game, they're basically just obstacles. My man can destroy monsters all day, but he can't open a door. NPCs are equally functionless. They just kind of say whatever nonsense that doesn't seem very relevant to the story when you talk to them. So most things in this game, just set dressing. But the set is well dressed. The scenery is constantly changing, pretty seamlessly, I might add. It's not like you walk through a line and now it's snowy. It's a pretty gradual progression to different sceneries. I also prefer this art style, this stylized art style, to a hyper-realistic art style. Pretty much at any given moment in the game, no matter what zone you're in, if you just stop and look around, it's beautiful. They stuck to the standard formula locations, but they didn't miss. They hit with every single one. Each one feels unique, feels magical. And this might be a hot take, but some people, they go visit the ocean and they don't swim. They're just there for the beauty. And for me, I swim in the ocean. But the metaphorical ocean that is this video game, I feel like I don't need to swim. And so the hot take is that the shallowness is kind of a convention of the genre of JRPGs at this point. And that being said, I give the setting a huge thumbs up. I loved it, and it's probably the reason that I would play this game. And if I were to suggest it to a person I know is just like me, I would probably suggest it on the basis that it's a beautiful game. Exploration is the main reason I play games. It's the reason I love JRPGs, and for me, it's the best part of this game. So that's the setting, but how do you navigate this beautiful world? Next, we're gonna talk about the movement mechanics. You can run and sprint, you can jump and double jump, you can even dash infinitely. There's unlimited fast travel to any point of interest within the current zone that you're in. And I didn't find this out until much later in the game, so this might be a tip for some of you, but you can fast travel to any of the save points that you've already visited on the same continent that you're on, as long as you fast travel from a meridian. So there's very free and flexible fast traveling in this game. Every time you unlock an elemental vessel, you gain another type of movement mechanic. These mechanics can only be activated at specific points on the map, and just like any other JRPG, you eventually get access to this game's version of a boat and an airship. While the movement isn't always the smoothest in this game, I will say it's pretty fast. The vessel movement mechanics are a little clunky, I admit that, but they do add like some variety, and they're not like everywhere. You don't have to use them all the time. So for me, they seem more welcome whenever I ran into it. It's kind of like it breaks up the monotony of just sprinting everywhere. There's some clunk that comes with the jump and the dash, but overall, I like them. I mean, you can kind of jump and scale up walls if you can find the right steps, which I find really rewarding somehow. The sprint is like pretty fast. When you couple that with the fact that there's not a ton of obstacles that'll like trip you up, and any small hurdles you'll be able to jump over just while sprinting, getting around the zones is relatively easy. Fast travel is also super fast. It's not like a long loading screen every time you want to fast travel, so you can pretty much fast travel anytime you want without any pain. In addition, the boat and the airship, in my opinion, do a really good job of like finding that middle ground between like chibi-fying the world and leaving the world still like big and beautiful. And I think it's a really good experience to sail around in your boat or fly around in your airship, or this game's version of those things. You still really have the ability to appreciate the beauty of the world. Ultimately, for this genre, I think the movement is great. I mean, like, I know that this is a bit of a controversial opinion because I've read some people saying that, you know, it felt like they were moving through molasses. But for me, I don't really have that experience. So if you did have that experience, comment below. For anyone else that wants to read the comments that's thinking about playing the game, I would love to hear what you have to say about the movement. But for me, especially when comparing it to the rest of the genre, I think that the travel and the movement in this game is, I mean, gets a thumbs up. The last aspect of this game I want to discuss is the treasures and the goodies that you find along the way. All of the goodies you can find out on the map fall into two categories for me. One, the ones that are marked by the map, and the other one, the ones that aren't. You can find plenty of consumable items and in-game currency just kind of laying around. They're marked with like yellow flashing lights. There's also something called grizzly syrup, which are these giant orange orb floating things that are scattered around the map. For the things that are marked on the map, before you've acquired any of these items, they're marked with blue circles on the map to show you where they are. These are things like chests, elemental like trial fight zones that can help you gain abilities on your elemental plot, and also save points. All the items that are marked on the map that are associated with an element are not marked on the map until you have access to that elemental vessel. I have kind of mixed feelings about the treasures and finding things in this game. The consumable items, as well as the grizzly syrup, I actually was worried about because, I mean, they kind of stand out. They're kind of an eyesore in the otherwise beautiful views in the game. But they kind of go away after a little while, or rather they blend into the background. Big bonus, you don't have to like do an animation to pick them up. You just run over them and they get there. Unfortunately, like every time you pick up a grizzly syrup, your guy goes grizzly, and that's annoying. So ultimately, I did enjoy all of the items that were not marked on the map. And honestly, I did even enjoy all the items that were marked on the map. It kind of gives you a reason to go back, because after you get an elemental vessel, more items are available, more things to pick up and more things to do in the past zones. And so I do enjoy that aspect of the collectibles around the map. Plus, all the animations to collect them are pretty short, and maybe I'm impatient, but I just hate when you have a zillion things to collect and it takes you 4 seconds to pick every one of them up. That's 4 zillion seconds. Also, the fact that not everything is marked on the map until it's accessible, that's a huge plus, because it doesn't feel like you're overwhelmed at any time. Everything seems pretty manageable as you're navigating through the world. Now, the issue I have, the reason I have mixed feelings, is because they're marked on the map. And there's no way to turn this off that I found. Maybe there is. If there is a way to turn off the specific markers that let you know that that an item's there, let me know, because I tried, but I couldn't find anything except for just turning off the mini-map. And you know, I want to know where I am in the map. I just don't want to know where everything I haven't found is. I just find that, like, if everything is marked on the map, there's no joy in finding anything. It kind of removes, as I said earlier, exploration is like the reason I play these games. And so it kind of removes an aspect of excitement and exploration if you're constantly staring at your minimap to find out where the hidden treasures are. I mean, are they even hidden? No, they're right on the map. This could just be me, but this is definitely a direction that RPGs are going in general, making things easier to find, but I personally just don't like it. Let me know. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it. For me, I just don't like that hidden treasures are kind of fading out of gaming. So Visions of Mana is pretty representative of JRPGs as a whole in my mind. It's beautiful, pretty shallow in its setting, but it has a very complicated and sometimes rewarding combat system. There's a few janks here and there with the navigation and the UI, but nothing to write home about. In general, I want to make this clear because I feel like I didn't make it clear with my Final Fantasy VII video. I did enjoy the game. I've had a lot of fun playing the game. I pretty much always have fun playing video games. And one last thing to mention about the game is it has some microtransactions. I didn't mention that because I pretty much covered how I feel about microtransactions in my video about modern gaming, which if you want to, you can watch that here. My name is Terrence. I'm gonna keep playing games till I find the perfect one. Peace. Lerv.